Welcome to Classical Education, a podcast for those who believe in rediscovering the art of asking questions, engaging in conversation, and attending to the ideas at the heart of well-ordered teaching and learning. I invite you to join me on a journey in pursuit of the true, the good, and the beautiful as a participant in the great conversation and listen to the many voices coming from the world of classical education. I am happy to announce two exciting opportunities. First, Beautiful Teaching is hosting an online classical education conference. This conference is called Vital Ideas, and it is all online. Every session will be recorded so you can come and go as needed. This conference is not only for home educators, classroom teachers, and school leaders, but also for parents. If you are a parent with a child in a classical school, or you are considering classical education as a viable option, check out our conference. Featured speakers for this conference include 11 master teachers who are all on the Beautiful Teaching team, and collectively we are leading 16 sessions over 2 days. Teachers can earn up to 11 hours towards continuing education credits as well. Early bird registration is only $69 right now until April 1st. The next exciting announcement is that we're piloting a new Pro Gymnasmata writing curriculum, as well as a grammar and rhetoric primer curriculum. Space is limited for these pilots, and they are filling up quickly. Visit our website for more details on both the curriculum pilots and the online classical education conference. All the details for the conference, the schedule, the speakers, and all the details for the curriculum pilots are all on our website. So visit beautifulteaching@gmail.com. That's my email, sorry. You can email me, but visit our website at beautifulteaching.com. Thank you for listening and enjoy today's show. Today I have with me Michael and Katherine Fitzgerald of Northern Schoolhouse. Michael serves as the principal for Northern Schoolhouse, and Katherine is the instructional coordinator. The mission and the values of the school are very strong and beautiful, which is why I asked them to come on the program today. Before I introduce them, I'm going to read a brief statement from their website. While we continually present your child with high-level classical content, we value a warm and positive environment every step of the way. We blend the direct study of timeless material with the joy of learning. In the end, through a study of the classics, nature, and art, we want our students to love excellent things and find meaning everywhere. We want to help them grow a vital interest and care for life, overtaking the artificialities of boredom. Our students are well aware of one of our main schoolhouse mantras: boring people find things boring, and interesting people find things interesting. So, the reason I invited them on today is I took a journey into their website and found so many interesting ideas and instructional methods that I just had to invite them to come onto the program today, because I think this school stands as a bulwark of what we really should be doing in classical education. And I want Michael and Katherine to share their vision and the beauty of this school that they have been working so hard in developing in New York. So, Katherine and Michael, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Adrian. Thanks for having us on here.
Yeah,
It's
I'm
great to be
really
here.
excited to introduce you to our listeners. So, what I want you to first do, each of you, is take a moment to introduce yourselves and tell our listeners how each of you got into education.
Go ahead.
All right. Well, I'm Katherine Fitzgerald. And when I was very small, I always wanted to be a mother. And I started working with children as soon as I could, babysitting and helping families at a fairly young age, and continued to work for pay and for not pay, working with children everywhere I could. And I eventually found myself often working with underserved children and homeless populations, and eventually third world populations. And I just very passionate about helping children figure out who they are and continually grow as people. And that kind of merged with my husband's passion for education and our growing family, and we found our purpose.
Yeah, and I think that the merging was, I think, the key part of it. I was always even when I was small, people would ask me, they, well, what do you want to do when you're older? And I was always like, I have never had an answer. And it was all, but I would always answer with the first answer that came to me. And it was always like, well, I guess be a teacher.
Huh.
I don't really know. I guess be a teacher, but it was never really too strong of a thought. It was just always the one that was most present. And then, and then later on, and you're finishing high school, and you're like, well, you're going to go to college. What are you going to do? And I was like, I don't know. I guess become a teacher. And so, and so I did. So I finished that out, and Katie and I had done a little bit of traveling and a little bit of teaching and things like this. But then finished my degree as my English teaching degree, and got into public education, and had a lot of really great experiences, but also some experiences that were quite, how do you say, souring, I guess, in some way. And it was during this time that we started having a family, and Katie started saying things that didn't make any sense to me in my paradigm. And it was like, well, as we have kids, we'll be homeschooling them. And I was like, what are you talking about? That doesn't make any sense to me at all. None of that resonates. And part of that is because there's such a disconnect of what homeschooling is in
Mm.
the general population. And for some people, it conjures up kind of strange imagery. And for other people, it conjures up no image at all. And for a very small segment of society, it conjures up the most wholesome environment and the most rich environment. And so then it was at that point we started looking more into it, and we found some literature that was really thought provoking and stimulating. And Katie already had some background in Montessori, and so that was eye opening for me. And then a little bit about like Waldorf education, and some parts of that were quite eye opening. And then as we kept going further and further into it, and we discovered, well, there's this thing called classical education. And later on, it's like, oh, there's this lady named Charlotte Mason. And all of a sudden, all of these understandings we were having were becoming, I think, more wholesome and more complete on that journey. And then along this way, I left public school and got into a really experimental private school. And from there, we were actually had the opportunity to. This was all in Idaho, where there's an enormous homeschooling community, and
Hmm.
so we were getting into a lot of homeschooling there, and a lot of varieties of it. And it was during this time that all of these ideas were kind of merging together, along with our reading of um, Socrates, through the pen of Plato, and Confucius. And then during this time, we actually had an opportunity to come to New York, where I could come work at a private academy here. And then it was then that we were asked to start this elementary school that we're now currently running. And so there's a lot of other tangents in there, but that's kind of the timeline of how it all was. And the whole process has been one that's constantly opening our eyes to
Hmm.
what education has always been and what the purpose of education has always been, which today has been morphed into something like test scores. And I think traditionally it was always about enlightening the mind and to becoming a more complete human being, and a supremely useful human being who is also intelligent and virtuous. And so that's kind of brought us to this. And it was funny. We were always said, well, maybe we'll start a school one day. And then all of a sudden we were asked to start one.
Oh, that's
And so
beautiful. I
here we
love
are.
it. Yeah, so this is great. You brought in homeschooling, you brought in Montessori, Waldorf, classical. Tell us a little bit more details about what ultimately attracted you to this classical model. It sounds like it was a process, and you and I both know that kind of all of these models mesh together in certain ways of helping to create the person to flourish in their best, human potential, to their best potential, which is what I heard you say is kind of the role and idea of what classical education is traditionally. So I want to hear a little bit more details wrapped around the first part of your story and what attracted you ultimately to like creating this model that you have.
And what would you say that is? What's the
Yeah,
classical side
I
of that?
think part of, in describing education and true education, another piece of that has to do with human lineage and understanding human history and how human culture and knowledge has somehow passed to this time, and it's somehow still applicable. And that is totally fascinating, and especially in the modern setting. um, I think there's a lot of disconnect to what we could say would be true human culture, or the true pursuit of knowledge, and tapping into that lineage of knowledge and culture. And I think people, even if they don't know it, I think they feel discouraged in their lives and even despondent, because maybe they don't know where they came from, and they don't know what's ahead, and everything seems dismal. Everything seems shallow. And one thing about classical education, the difference being that it focuses on um, old original sources, knowledge and culture through time, way back in time. Um,
And what's interesting about that too, as well, is this idea of what's original. And we don't realize that, if you go back to the origin of things, well, that's what's the most original. And that's why we keep you kind of go back to the source and you draw from those things. And that's what makes the things the most sort of vitalized and full of life. And so if we keep looking to the past, not because it's old for the sake of old, but because as we look back to what's most original, that's where all of the most powerful things are. The things that keep resonating with everybody cross culturally. And so I think as we started, I think you ask what kind of pulled us into this classical world. And I think it was just looking at history. You look at history and you say, well, where did this idea come from? And well, what was it like before? And what was education? And you start even looking at the etymology of words and like education, like where does this word education comes from? And you know, it from the Latin word educare, meaning to lift up, to pull upward, almost like you're being pulled out of Plato's cave or something toward new insights. And it's like you even look at what's the history of these words and where does all this come from? And so it was along this line that obviously we fell into learning more about Charlotte Mason. That was huge. That was a really big step. And it was also during this time we started reading John Taylor Gatto, and that was really huge as well. Actually, when I read his Underground History of American Education, I actually didn't know how I was going to go back to school. I was on
Right.
winter break in my public school, which is a very it was a solid school for what we were trying to do. But I read that and I was like, oh my goodness, I don't know how I'm supposed to go back. And so I just decided I would start telling the kids the truth about education. I would say, look, this is what this is made for. Part of it is to turn you into a mindless zombie. So
Yeah.
the only way to overcome that is to completely overpower the system with your own willpower of taking intelligence as something that you're supposed to become enlightened by. Take Shakespeare and don't just do it going through the motions. Never, ever go through the motions. And that's how you defeat the system. Because the system wants part of the system wants people to become automatons because they're easily managed. And so I started saying to them, look, this is the point of school. And the only way to overcome that, you have two options. One is drop out, and that's not a very good option. And the other one is to take everything being offered to you on these sort of these gems that have been enlightened to over thousands of years, and take them and let them make you awesome.
Mm,
And so Charlotte Mason, John Taylor Gatto, that really pulled us into the classical vein, and that was really huge. That was a really big part of where we are today. I'd say those two influences are quite significant.
and we saw the overlap, between all these approaches, whether it's Montessori or Waldorf or any of the various classical approaches. There's so much overlap, and we thought we don't have to box ourselves into one approach. All of these approaches are doing beautiful things, and we just kind of wanted to start playing with our own mix.
I love that. I love that. And it shows on your website mission and the various pages I've read on your website. So let's dive into what are some principles from the classical tradition that stand out to both of you as being necessary to call your school a classical school. I know that when I looked at your website, I was like, "Oh, this is great. I have never seen this in a classical school, but it should be." Like, so you guys have some, I think, very unique. I really like how you said, Catherine, that you sort of took these best ideas and merged them into what you saw as being a beautiful part of the tradition, and it shows on in your principles. So I want you to walk our listeners through those principles and how you develop them and how you implement them.
I think at the bottom, we say that we're three things: we're classic, we're nature, and the arts. So it's like at the bottom, we have to make sure that all three of those sort of pillars are in everything we're doing. And so making sure we're going on lots of hikes with the kids, trying to pull our science program outside as much as possible, and getting away from textbooks in that way, using a lot of living sources, living materials. Uh, and so it's like classical, nature, and the arts. Those are three real big ones. And so putting the content first. What is the, a lot of people say, well, it doesn't matter what you're reading as long as you're reading. And we actually think that's backwards. It matters tremendously what you're reading. That should be, it's so important. Maybe you could say that for writing. Maybe you could say, well, it doesn't matter what you're writing as long as you're writing. Maybe I'm open to a piece of that argument. Not fully, but with reading, even more so, it should be the best material. And so we just surround the kids with the best literature we can possibly find. We have, starting in grade 1, we're working the kids through Shakespeare. All of our school can recite a portion of, the most of, or all of Shakespeare's Sonnet 18. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? All of them can do that. And they can all recite these various things from it. So that's one example. We just try to surround them with the best things possible. Because I think it, one of the ways I would characterize classical education is content first. Rich content first, and character development. It's like those two things coming together, character and content, whereas skills is an outgrowth of those things.
Mm-hmm.
Modern education focuses on 21st century skills. They're worried about, are you tech literate? Are you practicing critical thinking? But we're like, look, just give the best possible things you can do, the best possible things to study and think about. And as a side effect of that, you become a critical thinker. You become a deep thinker, you become a better reader and a better writer, just as a sheer side effect of those things. And then, of course, lots of exposure to beautiful artworks and practicing these techniques of the art world, and then going outside a lot to explore the natural world. And those three things come together, and it's like you have the wonderful beginnings of a human being for the rest of their life.
Hmm. What are some unique principles that your school applies to see this to make this happen, to bring these
Well,
pillars into play, if you will?
yeah, I think part of it is almost counterintuitive at first because we do have kind of this humanitarian side, this love of childhood flavor that's in there. A lot of the things we're doing, these kind of direct source classical exposures with the children, they're not graded. They're not. We're not forcing this on them. These things just kind of come around through our communal attitude and through the positive culture we have around learning and around learning difficult things because it makes us awesome and opens our minds and our
We
hearts.
just kind of put it out there for the kids. We're like, hey, we're all going to do this thing. What do you think? And they're like, sure, I'll try. I'll try it. And you just surround them with the best things, and they just do it.
And you always have a couple of kids who are like, that's too hard. I'm not going to go for that. And then a little while, most kids are doing it. And it's like actually not so hard reciting Shakespeare as an example. And then pretty soon everyone's doing it and they're having a great time with it. So I think maybe this is kind of one of our approaches that, like I said, could be rather counterintuitive, where we're not saying every child will do this, every child will do
Yeah, it's
that.
kind of like the difference between having high standards and making something standardized.
Mhm.
Nothing about our school is standardized, but in no way is it student led. I think a better characterization of us would be that we are teacher guided and student engaged. And
Okay.
so it's like it's really the feast, really. It's Charlotte Mason's feast. We're just like trying to lay out the best possible feast we can. And the kids can kind of dive as far into something as they want. And then it's our job, using the wisdom of our teachers, to um, try to bring them up to the next level. Like, where are they at? And how do we bring them up one level more? And so, and you see this actually reflected. It goes all the way. We know it as the Socratic method. It's not just asking questions. It's like, no, Socrates knew where he wanted to take you, and he was going to keep giving you the opportunities to um, kind of have for you to assume that you got there all by yourself, but it
Mhm.
was actually him drawing you
Hmm.
there. And it's the same in Confucian education. Confucius makes it very clear. He says the job of the teacher is to open up one corner and for the student to go get the other three corners. And so it's not about, we have this sort of, um, I think this mischaracterization of even classical Chinese education, that they were walking around hitting kids with bamboo. And you go read Confucius and you realize that that is not the case. It's all, you almost read something and you're like, this is like almost student centered stuff. It's not student centered, but it's like he is putting the student at the center of the educational journey and giving them what they need, drawing on a variety of tools to get them there. And that's really, I think, what we're doing in the schoolhouse is we use any tool we can to get the kids engaged, get them excited, offering them lots of different ways to invest with their mind in these things.
We want them opting in, and that's another
That's the big
unique
one,
feature.
opting in.
We
Yeah.
want them opting in, and Confucius and Socrates, and Charlotte Mason hits on it as well. They kind of have this magic wand where they set up the conditions or set up the framework where their learners want to opt in. They want to take the next step, and that definitely we incorporate that a lot, whether it's through through our assessment challenges that we're building, these types of things. There's levels to opt in for the child. Everyone's going through the spelling assessment, but they're deciding which level they're going to shoot
So for instance, on that front, like with this is a simple thing, but we call our assessments challenges. And so we have this challenge week, and everything is building toward it in this funny way. And then the kids have these 5 layers, these 5 levels they can choose that they're going to shoot for. And each section has like 20 words in it. And for the younger students, they have an easier list. And for the older students, they have a more challenging list. And they can say, well, I want to go for the highest level, thesaurus, which is the word we get for thesaurus, which just means treasure chest, basically. And they can go for thesaurus, which is the highest level, or they can pick the bottom level, which we call petroglyph, and just cave paintings, basically. And they can pick that one. They do the whole test, but all we want to see is growth.
Mm-hmm.
So if they're getting 100, if they're shooting for the lowest level, we just want to see that they get all the words right.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. And there's no punishments for getting something wrong. We just say, man, you missed that one. What a simple thing. I wonder how we could fix that. And then the kids dive in and they try to fix it. And so it's like finding ways to get them to make a decision. And really that's what teaching comes down to. Teaching is the art of getting a child to make a decision. And as soon as they make a decision, they're also practicing self-control at the same time. And so that's what we want our kids to do. We want them to make great decisions, but it's not a decision to say, for instance, well, what do you want to do today? To say that to a child or to an adult. There's no decision being made. Maybe an adult can turn that into a decision, but a decision is when several things are weighed against each other. That's a decision. It's not a decision to say, well, little Adrian, what do you want to eat today? And you're like, well, ice cream, of course. That wasn't actually a decision. You're just following your desires, your impulses, versus saying to a child, we have these 2 books we can read together today, this one or this one. Which one sounds good to you? And they're opting in. Or, hey, here's all these words you're going to practice. Which level do you want to aim for? I don't care which level they aim for. If they're always picking the lowest level, then we see that habit. And maybe we want to say, look, you always get this habit right. Let's aim for 1 up. So
Right.
it's not wide open. They're not choosing anything. Like they're choosing which level they go for, but they're not really choosing, full on what you think is student-centered education.
They're not choosing willy-nilly.
No, none of that.
It's a very directed menu.
Yes.
The menu
Yes.
has specific options.
That's right. That's right. And we call this investment. So investment, a lot of schools talk about engagement, but it's like, what is engagement? Engagement is what it looks like when students have made a choice. Engagement doesn't just mean, I'm sitting here doing what I'm doing because the teacher told me to. Sometimes that's engagement, but just looking at them, you think, they're so engaged. Well, maybe not. They might just be doing it because they're told to, and they're good kids and they're really obedient, or they're afraid of some consequence and punishment. But it's like, no, engagement is the side effect of investing willingly into something. And so the more and more we lay out these options for our kids, it's even when they're going to bed at night. It's like, hey, it's bedtime. Do you want to brush your teeth first or get your pajamas on first?
Yeah, you're going to do both. Which one do you want to do first, right? Yeah.
Which one? But as soon as they make a choice, they're becoming really good at being decision makers. And then later on, that will translate into being a good leader. So right now
Sure.
it's the nuts and bolts of being a great decision maker. And we do this a lot through our challenges. We have
Mhm.
tons of challenges that they're doing all the time. But they're kind of choosing how they interact with these things. We just lay out the best stuff, and then they're taking little nibbles, and they go farther and farther and farther. It's quite remarkable, actually. Just
Uh-huh.
surrounded with the best stuff, and they want it.
I love that. Catherine, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, this also leaks over not into just academics, but this kind of other part of what we do here that isn't just, kind of classical book knowledge. We have a lot of cultural things happening as well, a lot of practical things happening as well. And so we offer workshops every Friday as part of our Friday fair. And every child attends every workshop. And you might have a child that goes to the sauerkraut making workshop, and he's picking what he's putting in his sauerkraut, and he might throw some cabbage in there and smash it up and be like, yeah, that was cool, whatever. And most of them are really into it, but maybe it hasn't like really grabbed him. He's like, why are we smashing cabbage? He still doesn't
They're
quite.
pretty much all
They're
into it.
pretty
But
much
yeah,
all into
sure.
that one, but maybe not. But then he goes to the next one. Maybe he goes to archery, or he goes to sewing, and he's like, well, I've never done this before. And you start him, sewing, and he's making himself a bag to hold some things, and it's got some pockets going on, and it's got lots of steps, because one of the things we do with the kids is we're not gluing pasta to paper plates here.
Right.
We're taking them through actual useful or beautiful, sometimes complex and lengthy projects that you have to work on over a long period of time. This is not instant gratification. This is not finger paint handprint time. And so he might be building this bag, and it's really challenging at first, and there's 100 steps, and he feels like he'll never get through it, but he's starting, and he feels how gratifying it is with his hands to start to bring this object together. And he has selected his fabric, he has selected his thread, and he's really got a natural ability for pulling this thing together. And he starts to move very quickly, and he feels very gratified. And the next thing you know, he wants more projects, and he's asking for these things at home, or whether it's whittling, or like I mentioned, archery or chess. More often than not, you do sometimes have kids that are like, I'm not sure, I've never done this, or this is one of those hard things. And they're not full heart at first, but more often than not, kids left and right are discovering that they're really good at some things, and they are really gratified by some things. And some of the things they're doing are very useful and very practical or very beautiful. And I think this is really part of also a classical education, going back to that like lineage of humanity. They feel real, they feel worthy, and they feel like
Dignified.
themselves
There's a
and
lot of dignity.
dignified. Yes.
And
Yeah.
something inside that too is none of that stuff is being graded. They're
No.
making sauerkraut because that's what we do as humans, and they're making they do a lot of sewing projects. And the kids will rotate between these workshops on these Friday afternoons to wood whittling or archery, whatever it is that's being offered. And the kids they're just diving in because we're offering it to them. We say, hey, here's this thing we're doing today, and they're always pumped. They're always excited to be doing these things. They know Friday is always a Friday fair, and the morning is always a hike. We have no objective on the hike, but just to go and take in the splendors of nature. And then the afternoon is a series of workshops, and 3 or 4 workshops, and the kids in groups rotate between them. They're not graded. None of what we do is really graded in that way. It's all assessed. There's a review and a revision for everything.
We're looking for growth, for
But we're
measuring growth.
yeah, that's the big thing. We're looking for growth. We want growth, investment. We want grit. That's where we want to see the kids grow. And we want them being fundamentally, we want our kids just being interested in everything. And if you just offer it to them, they will be. But if you
Mhm.
offer it to them and then say, now you have to do this in this way or it doesn't count, it's like, well, that's not how there's a certain way you have to make sauerkraut, but there's a lot of variety within there as well. And so what really, like Katie said, that's a really classical idea actually, that our kids should feel useful in a very human way, not just because they can ace a spelling test or they can tell you what 50 prepositions are. Like, that's
Right.
fine. That's not enough.
Okay, so one thing that I hear you guys say often is we don't grade, but we assess. And I know our listeners are probably like, how in the world is that working? And how are the parents and the
Yeah.
teachers responding to this? But I think it's a key idea, and I want to hear more details about how you're going about this.
Yeah, so I think yeah, it's a funny thing to think about. How do you grade but not assess? I think
Other way around.
oh yeah, how do you assess but not grade? I think part of it is semantics. But the other one is there's a more fundamental principle in there, which is a lot of times kids they go through school and they're constantly graded, and it's like, well, it's what we do to meet. We all know this. That's what we do to meet, and that grade sticks with them. Oh, you're a 70%, or but really we say none of that means anything. But are you doing better next time? And so, if a kid turns in, if a kid works on something, let's say it's their math, for instance, and it's fully individualized for math. Whatever level you're at is the level we give you. If you're a fourth grader and you need fifth grade level math, we give that to you. If you're a second grader and you need fourth grade level math, we give that to you. If you need first grade level math, we give that to you, and we try to help you move up higher and higher. So part of that assessment piece, it's not graded because they're not that if they turn in that math lesson for the day, it's not coming back as an 80%. It comes back with a little arrow next to the number that they got wrong, and they have to fix it.
And
Right.
what this does is, we can, being a B student in math is considered great. But what that essentially does is says it's okay to live your life 80%. It's okay to live 80% finished. It's okay to live
Right.
80% good.
And we don't even talk about that. I mean, we have different times we're discussing with the kids all the time. What does it mean to be a person who's all in? We're always talking about this, but we don't say, look, this is a 80% and you need to be all in. That's why you fix this. No, we just, oh, hey, by the way, these couple are wrong. Why don't you just go ahead and see what you did on those and give this back to
And a
us?
lot of times we'll tell them you need to revise this. This needs revision.
Or it's not nice enough. Maybe it's
Mhm.
not neat.
Maybe it's not tidy, you can't read it. So, we're really big on revision, the revision
Growth.
process,
Yeah.
and getting a child to look at their work again and again until it's truly done, until it's truly done well, until it's truly done to their best ability. And so they get a lot of chances to, in terms of the, ongoing work to do this thing. So essentially, every child is ending around 100% because they are just working on it until it's right.
And we don't have any students who are like choosing not to work. Like that's not something we have, because what else are they going to do? This thing is put in front of them. Everyone else is doing it. And well, this is what makes you awesome. And we tell them that. And so there are some days where kids are more tired and don't have the same energy. We don't hold that against them. We're just going for this thing. And this is what makes you great. It's what makes you a superior person and superb. And so that's like the difference between assessment and grading. The assessment, I suppose, is really more based on we're looking at the work, we're offering some level of feedback, and if it needs to go back to them, it goes back. Otherwise, we put it in a portfolio, and 5 times a year, the kids hold these giant presentations we call summits for the parents, and the kids lead these workshops for the parents. And before they do that, they show them their portfolios of the previous tour, what we call a tour, which is one of our learning units, I guess. Instead of
A
having
session.
quarters, we have 5 tours, and the tour just means that we're touring that knowledge during that round. And so it goes into their portfolio, and some of the stuff is completed, some of it isn't, and all of it shows wonderful growth. And so it's really about the growth. And then for the another one in terms of the assessment, we do have a week we call our challenge week,
Hmm.
and during that week is where we do give the kids. It's the only time they really get it, which is maybe you want to how does challenge
Sure.
week work?
Yeah.
Maybe explain
So
it better.
one thing to understand first about assessment, that we've noticed is that an assessment is just as much a reflection of the teacher as it is of the child. So, for
Yeah,
example,
what
you.
did Edwards Deming? I don't mean to cut you off. Edwards Deming had this beautiful quote that resonated with us years ago, and he said, "I never give my students a grade, because it's not the exact quote, but he said whatever the quality of their work is a reflection upon how well I've taught them." And so we know this is true. However, a kid is doing is a reflection on the teacher, maybe more so than it is of the kids sometimes. So go
Yeah,
ahead.
and when we look at it this way, we can really tell. There's a couple different ways to look at this. One is in the case where every kid in the class got an A. Let's say, okay, great. You just see your own kid's thing. You're like, great, you're getting an A. You're doing great. well, maybe every kid got an A, and maybe the test wasn't that hard, and maybe it's not that quality, and so everyone gets an A. You have the other situation where your kid got a C, and you're like, oh my goodness, my kid got a C. He normally always gets A's. I'm going to have to take away some, friend time or whatever until he can get his grades up. But maybe the highest grade in the entire class was a 78. And maybe this test was really hard, or maybe it wasn't taught very well. And so there's so much context around these subjective grades because they are subjective, they're completely subjective. And when you just get your one kid's
Right.
grade at the end of a test, you don't have all that context. How did all the other kids do? How was the teaching quality? How hard was the test? You don't have this picture. And so this is what we wanted to avoid. We wanted to avoid this situation where, the teacher could issue the test and kind of wipe their hands clean, and however the kids do is how they do, and it's the kids' fault,
Hmm.
for better or worse. This is not effective testing. And so, and it can be. There are situations where it can be. Those two situations I gave are just, examples of where it can go wrong. And there are other areas too. But what we do is the kids do pre-tests, and they don't receive the results of these right away. And the pre-tests are really, we want to see, what do you already know and what don't you know.
The pretest really just serves to show the growth by the end. We don't really care about where they land. We just want to see, have you leveled up?
Because it's another situation.
Right.
You might have hit an English class who gets 100 on his test. He's like, well, I learned that last year. So he didn't actually learn anything new during that unit. He already knew it. A pretest will show, okay, they're coming in knowing this. We need to give them something a little harder because we place children individually to push them. Or wow, a child, he knows none of this. Maybe he needs to back up a little bit. So we can see exactly where they're coming in at. And then when they take an assessment later, maybe they started getting, they started with a 15%, and maybe by the end of it, they were testing a 60%. That's a big growth.
Yeah.
That's a
That's
really
huge,
big growth.
significant.
And so we want to show this. Maybe they were testing a 50% and then they're 100%.
And we've had that with several kids.
Yep.
Yeah. And some kids come in with just tremendous test anxiety.
They do.
And
Yeah.
we kind of have to recalibrate them a little bit. And for one, it just kind of, we try to get them to smile first, smile, and try to just be full human in here. And then we say, hey, and by the way, we're just going to do this awesome stuff. And then it's kind of fun. It's kind of gamified, and they love it. They pick which level they're going to go for. They take the whole, let's say spelling, for instance, they take the whole test, but they're only really concerned with the level they're going
That
for.
they chose.
And then it's like they just want it, like they know they got 100 at the end. They're like, oh, I got 100 on that one. And they're like, oh, I know there was three I couldn't remember. And it's like they're so invested.
They care.
They care so much. That's the biggest thing. Like, can you get a kid to care? I've had lots of, I also teach. I still teach English at our academy here. That we're kind of our school that we kind of work with, and I also teach English there, and and I also do SAT prep and these sorts of things. And I've had lots of students come through, and they're remarkable students, and they are straight A's through the board. They're wonderful at reading and writing, and their math is awesome. And some of these kids, in particular, they're high level math, but they don't love it, and that's half a problem right there. That they're really, really good at it, but the other half is they don't necessarily love it. And so we want our kids coming out to care tremendously. We want them to love these things, and by the time they're going to get to Shakespeare later on, we want them to go, oh yeah, I already did this one. I studied this one before. Midsummer Night's Dream. I already did this. This is great. And
Right.
they're going to be all
They'll
in.
say, I love this one. It's so fun.
Yeah.
Instead of the groaning that, a lot of high school
Hmm.
English teachers know,
Yeah,
like the
right.
groans that
Oh,
come forth
and
when you mention Shakespeare.
talk about a tragedy.
Hmm.
What a
Yes.
tragedy, that kids walk out of high school, either being apathetic at best about Shakespeare, or hating it,
Yeah.
thinking that it's horrible and not worth their time. It's like we're talking about one of the greatest pieces of art that have ever been created, one of the greatest artists ever. He touches on every possible thing you can think of, and his insights into human nature, and not even just the beauty of his work, but the depth and what he's drawing on. And to really get it, you need to know your Bible, you need to know your Greek and Roman mythology, you need to know your Norse mythology, you need to understand these things. And uh, if they're devoid of that walking out from Shakespeare, then we've done a great disservice. And
Mhm.
so we don't want that. We want to correct that before they get to high school. We want them loving math and reading and writing and thinking and conversing. It's the best we could shoot for.
Well,
So you
one
did.
go ahead. Go
Oh,
ahead,
I was gonna
Catherine.
say you did ask how are teachers responding this? How are parents responding to this kind of uh, mm, different form of assessment? The children obviously love it. Those who don't have test anxiety automatically think it's the best thing. Those who do have test anxiety carry that anxiety for a short time, and then they start to relax and they start to test very well. Um,
Because
teachers,
usually the ones with test anxiety are good.
they're usually good
They're really good
students.
anyways
Yeah.
because they
Mhm.
care so
But sometimes
deeply.
they don't test well because they're so nervous. Um, teachers, it does take time for them to relax and kind of trust this. And it's also accountability for the teachers. You taught this, you need to form an assessment for this, and we need to see how you did with all of this, because it is, like I said, just as much a reflection on the teacher. And so they do well with it.
And that said, we don't use it as some sort of cudgel against the
No, not at
teachers,
all.
but it's just to inform the whole school and be like, well, if you thought your students really knew this, but then they didn't do so good, either something was faulty in the assessment, you didn't prepare them for it, or something, or we didn't prepare the teacher well enough, something like this.
Mhm.
It's just really to assessments. I think we've got it all backwards now these days. It's
Mhm.
meant to for us to review our system and our management practices,
Mhm.
and then how is that being led along by the culture we're trying to create.
And I would say the biggest, the most challenging adjustment is for the parents,
Mhm.
because the parents, of course, all of us went through this system where you have a test. It means you got to try to get as close to 100 as possible.
Mhm.
And there's going to be some rewards and some punishments around how you do. Naturally, we want to reward our children for doing well. So if they take a pretest and they got 50%, well, parents aren't very happy about this in general if they don't understand the system. And then, later when they get 80% or 90%, that's really great. And, the parents, well, now you're doing well. Well, the pretest, they didn't know what was going to be on the test. We're seeing what they know in the first place. So, really, I think it is the most difficult for parents because they aren't here all day, every day, and they get just these little snapshots of what's going on.
But it's so many of the parents though, they can't believe the sorts of things that their kids are talking about over the dinner table.
Absolutely.
And like they can't believe what their kids are bringing up with them and how they're changing in terms of their
Mhm.
one of the things our parents talk about most is the change in confidence in their kids, the confidence and enthusiasm that
Yeah.
their kids are acting with. And that's a beautiful thing. I mean, enthusiasm, and theos, it means to be like almost like in God, in the divine, and like if our kids are walking around with that, this sort of holding their head high with this great dignity, and they're proud of their school, and then they're talking about, I don't know, the Aeneid or something over the dinner. I was having a discussion with two kids. We're on our spring break right now with two kids the other day.
They're 8 and 10.
They're 8 and 10, and they were getting picked up by their parents, and they were talking to me about the differences between the Iliad, the Odyssey, and the Aeneid. And they were leading that conversation with me. And they're like, Mr. Fitzgerald, isn't this strange that, XYZ, and they're laying out all this stuff for me. And I was like, this is so cool. I was like, this is so awesome. We're sitting here in front of the schoolhouse, and they're getting picked up. And um, that's just, and their parents see that. That's the other side of that. Is, yeah, I get to see this with
Mhm.
the kids,
Mhm.
but the parents see it. And so, like Katie said, that transition of thinking everything is about this final product
Mhm.
Mhm.
and the achievement, which we've definitely built in because we know that's we need to have that to sort of have our school make sense to people. We can't be full on homeschooling where we're just laying the feast and trusting the end result. But you have to build these things in so it makes sense to people. But our parents are also seeing the process, and they're
Mm.
seeing the growth in their kids holistically and their culture, and so it's quite lovely.
It's really wonderful to see. And, we have several parents that have been very moved. By the process, one parent in particular, talking about the assessment and math and these things, how we handle homework. We do have homework for the older children. He revealed to us halfway through the year last year that at first he was really nervous, that it didn't seem rigorous, it seemed too fun. And then he started to see his daughter's portfolios, and he could not believe the work that she was producing.
Yeah, it's really funny. I'm just remembering too another conversation with a parent this year, and she was, when I was telling her, we're always making changes to our assessments and our challenges, and she was saying, well, you might want to consider not having new students do these assessments when they first come in, because you really want to build the culture with them first. And this was a parent who was not thinking like that before. And I was like, well, no, I think we're still going to give it to them because I think we're building something very, very wonderful. But the fact that we have one of these parents who was not in line with that at first, they were really cautious about that, not doing assessments in the way that she had done them before. And now she's saying, well, maybe you want to hold off on giving the assessments until those kids become acclimated to the culture. And I was like, oh, wonderful.
Beautiful.
That's funny. That's funny. Well, it sounds like you're really tapping strongly into intrinsic motivation
Yes.
versus external motivation, which
Yes.
is what we see
Yes.
in a lot of schools, with rewards, candy, all of this. But you're really, really tapping deeply into the intrinsic motivation, which I did a podcast on 2 years ago
Mm,
with Dr.
mhm.
Okay.
Burgess, who's an expert in intrinsic motivation.
Yes. Yes.
So I think that you're kind of what I'm hearing, and I'm excited about this. I'm going to put a link in the show notes to the episode I did with Dr. Burgess on motivation, because he's an expert researcher in it, a good friend of mine, used to be my boss. And I feel like even though he and I talked about it, you guys are actually giving substance to how to apply the principles of intrinsic motivation in a school. And I really love that. So this is really, really practical and good. Um, One of the questions I know my listeners might have is, I'm hearing this multi grade level instruction model that might really scare some people. So, how do you implement, like, if you've got an 11-year-old who's kind of at what you would maybe call a third grade math level, and then you've got an 8-year-old who's maybe at a seventh grade math level? How are you making this work in the practical instruction, model? How is that work happening?
Yeah, so math is a unique one, and we handle math. The entire school does math at the same time. And something to point out too here about multi age or multi level instruction, because even in a classroom full of 11-year-olds, they're all sixth graders. Uh, you have multi level
Sure,
instruction. You have to
that's
have it
true.
It's already
happening.
there.
No matter what age, even if they're all the same age, born in the same month, they're going to be all over the map
But what
in
happens is
terms
then
of their
they move
skills.
on and they're still behind.
Yes.
Sure.
So this multi-age instruction is actually very, very old. Age segregated education is very modern.
Yeah, to enter into Plato's Academy, carved above the gate said, "Let no one enter here who does not know geometry." So I mean, it wasn't your age to get in; it was just, do you have the knowledge to
And the
get into this
passion.
thing? Yeah. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, yeah. So it's actually not as scary as it sounds, and not as difficult as it sounds. And we have many, many examples to look to throughout cultures and throughout history, in the East or in the West. Many different educators and philosophers and models and styles that are all mixed ages education. So the first thing is that we can just relax and know that this is actually very natural and it's worked very well for a very long time. And age segregated education isn't working. So
Correct.
that's the first.
That's
Yeah.
true.
That's the first thing. Then math specifically, basically, we placement test all the kids in math to see what they know, what they don't know, and
Yeah,
what they need to work on.
what content are we going to give them?
Yep,
Yeah.
exactly. And then we put them in small groups with children who are at covering the same concepts and practicing the same concepts as they are. And this is really movable. So sometimes you'll have an older child, let's say a fourth grader, who needs some second grade math catch up. It happens very, very quickly. He'll start practicing those things, second grade math, and then pretty soon he's moving on. Whereas maybe the younger children who are working on that still need more time with that. He filled in that gap, and he's ready to rock. He's ready to go back up to start his fractions, in fourth grade, because now he understands division a little better. Now he understands multiplication a little better, whatever it is. So it's constantly shiftable depending upon what the child needs at that during that session or during that time, and based on, like I said, placement testing, to see, okay, what have they understood, even over the summer, what have they retained, do they need a little bit more practice, maybe they need a short time of some what we would consider remedial work, just to get those gears de-rusted and turning again, and then they can jump back up into where they were. And then so their working group in math might not be children their age, might not be children from their classroom.
They're kind of in just small pods. And then as they're making progress faster and faster in that pod, we move them to another one. So this isn't like you're not the teacher isn't really working with a full class of like really big differences. They're all pretty close. They're closer than we realize. And if the teacher wants to stop everything and do a lesson on the board, then some kids might already know that and they're getting a refresher on it. And for other kids who didn't know that, this is useful information for them. And we can pull another kid to the board and have them teach it, break them off into small groups, pull off an individual student to the side. It's very, very flexible. And that's how kids are going to advance and grow. Sometimes you can do it in a large group. Sometimes you have to break it off into an individual. And sometimes you can put them in a little pod of 3, but you have to have a responsive teacher for sure. And then that's the way it has to go forward. But really having a kid who's working at a 4th grade level and a kid who's at a 2nd grade level, there's really not too much of a problem with that.
Sure.
Unless you're looking for them to just, you have some vision in your mind of where they need to be. And you're like, well, I need to get you to 7th grade math by the end of the year. Well, good luck. Good luck with that. You're gonna have to really push them really, really hard to get there, and you won't be able to do that with a group of students. Maybe with an individual.
Another really important factor here is the student to teacher ratio. So we have a maximum of 12 children in each classroom, and we have 2 adults in every classroom. So the groups aren't 20 children. You don't have 20 children at 3 or 4 different levels of math all on your own, and you have 40 minutes to get them all to their next worksheet. It does not look like that.
Okay, so I'm picturing, based on you told me about your Friday, I don't remember
Friday
what
fair.
Friday fair, and I'm thinking that's like handicrafts and art and nature stuff. So I'm imagining that your school, and I'd love to come visit. I'm
I would
imagining
love
that
to
your
have you.
school has like all of the students of various ages are just so used to shifting around together that
Yes.
they don't even really realize, or it doesn't even matter to them because it's like one big family. It's almost like a
Yes.
giant homeschool.
It is. It feels like that a lot. We had a parent last year start saying, "Small school,
school.
big family," and
Yeah.
that kind of stayed. And it's very much like that. The kids are constantly blended. Yeah, because on Fridays they don't stay with their home class.
Because they are in there.
So they're kind of choosing which activity they want on Friday. So you could have
Well,
Sort of.
I mean, we divide them off. We just number and we say, oh, if you're the number ones, head to this room first and go to this room, go to this room, go to this room. And then they rotate like every hour. So all the kids are getting all the workshops. But how far they go in that particular workshop, well, whatever. It's only meant to enrich them anyways. I even hate using that word enrichment. It's been so overused, but it's like that's what these things are. It's true enrichment, really making them rich people is what it's for. But usually during the day, even during the week, we also have art and music, and they have Chinese, they have dance,
Poetry.
poetry. So we have these other specific pods that they're going through during the week with their normal class. And so we have first through third graders in a class, and then third through fifth and sixth graders in a class. And so, but then on Friday, they're all mixed together. And even at any other time, they're mixed together all the time. So in their normal classes, it's still very flexible, but they're in there with with their kind of
Their home group.
their home people, their base camp, we call it. And then, but the rest of the time, they're just all running around together. It's crazy. We go outside and we're just like, they all play together. It's very, like you mentioned, like a homeschool
Yeah.
co-op bill. That's what it feels like. You have first graders running around and playing some game with fifth graders. And they
Yes.
care for each other. They learn from each other. It's really beautiful, beautiful to see.
It's so
And we don't
beautiful.
force it.
So, how many students are in your school?
So it's very small. We have 12 per class, and we only have 3 classrooms.
3 classrooms.
So we're very small. So
Okay.
we're, in the 30s. We're
And
not full right now.
and Michael, you're teaching also at the upper school that's
Mhm.
connected to this
Yeah.
school.
Yes, yeah.
Now,
So the whole school is called Northern Academy. There's also a college and a medical center. We're this huge, sprawling campus, and it was an abandoned medical center that was built over 100 years ago here in upstate New York. And then it was
wow.
abandoned and just left to ruin. And then the Northern system came in and started buying them up, and it was actually purchased by some people from some Chinese individuals. They had escaped China and persecution there of this ancient spiritual practice called Falun Gong, and they had left that. They were being so brutally persecuted there in China. They came here, and then they also saw the education here was like this flimsy thing that really wasn't going anywhere. And they said, well, let's start a school that teaches true history and high level academics and morality and character development. And so they started with a very small, like a single building with like 20 students as an academy. And now they've grown to over 200. And then just 2 years ago, this is our second year, they asked us to start the schoolhouse. And so we're kind of nestled within the larger Northern community, which is growing really fast. The campus is like transforming like right before your eyes. There's construction everywhere. It's really cool to see the change, the transformation, sort of breathing life into these old buildings. And so, yeah, I kind of work in both. I'm principal here, but then I'm also involved with the academy as well.
I see. And the academy is upper grades, and they do grade because you have to have transcripts, correct?
Yes, yes.
Yes.
So it's much more of what you would. They're doing some things also differently as well, but they have their what you would expect with a normal grading system. But they also have what we have as well, which is another form of assessment we didn't talk about called the character map,
Hmm.
which is we have a set of I don't know what you'd call habits and virtuous habits that 3 times a year we get together. All the teachers get together, and it's basically these maps showing how a student has grown over time with a certain virtuous habit. How there's a lot that goes into it, but it's very, very cool. And it basically says, has a student become more independent with this particular virtuous habit? It could be, oh gosh, we have a lot. We have the normal knowledge ones of like their literacy with word and their literacy with number, their nature study, but we also have their wonder and their insight and their finishing power. And we say, these all come under what we call our paths of attention, our 3 paths of attention: knowledge, genius, and heart.
Hmm.
And so under knowledge are the normal, habits of a scholar. But then under
Hmm.
genius are more of the creative capacity. It's their ability to pay attention to ideas and
And leadership.
experiences. Yeah, and their leadership, and it's their wonder, insight, their ability to deliver ideas in an expressive way. And we say, okay, so and then heart. And heart is things like warmth and control and their teamwork. And we say, in this particular area, have we seen growth in this student? And we have different categories of growth, and we say, have they grown in terms of their ability to do this more independently and in sort of new environments? And so we come together as a whole staff and we map out each student. It's quite time intensive, but then you get to give this, instead of a report card to parents, we give them this map, these this growing living document that we give to parents, and they love it. And it's very deep and detailed, and it comes with written feedback for each student as well. So they're not getting we pulled open a box, I don't know, sometime last year of Katie's report cards, and it was like, it told you nothing about her in fourth and fifth and sixth grade. It told you nothing at all. And so we have this. So this is also a similarity between us and the academy. They have their own character map. And each student gets placed on it as well. And so that's a key piece. Is Northern has a heavy emphasis on developing students who become leaders, but not just leaders, but leaders who are rich in character. And that's the biggest thing. If nothing else, we have students who are rich in character. And I think
beautiful.
everyone would be happy with that.
And it seems like these character map, I guess, assessments, if you will, or reports,
Yeah.
would be great to help a parent or a family be able to have something tangible that they can apply at home to help their student grow in certain areas, even in their home life. Am I correct?
Yeah, I
Oh,
think if
definitely.
anything, it
Yeah.
would give them some kind of parameters of what might they look for.
Mhm.
But I think for some homeschooling families, I think many are already just, if they're already just on the path and have a rich and loving home life with great literature, and they're trying. I think they're probably doing all of these
They're
things.
naturally doing
If they can just let go of their anxieties of messing up, they're going to see that nothing was messed up. They're doing just fine. But sure, I think this would give some families some parameters, maybe, of like, well, how do I help my kid become warm, or how do I help them with some of these genius components like wonder and insight, and what does that mean? So it would help give them some language, I guess, to on their journey. But I think most homeschool families are doing it without realizing that they're doing it. They got to let go of their anxieties.
Yeah.
They'll be fine.
And in terms of our families here, in general, it's very helpful and very eye opening. And just to illustrate something, you'll have we'll have a student who is very high in knowledge, a very, very good student, knows a lot across subjects, does very great work, but is maybe really low in genius.
And you put them in a team to solve a problem. We have a lot of problem solving activities, and they have nothing to contribute.
They don't know how to lead. They don't know how to speak for themselves. They maybe don't have a lot of social dignity. They maybe, allow themselves to be pushed around a bit socially. They might have, maybe they don't know how to deliver a speech or articulate their own thoughts, even though they have excellent thoughts. They don't believe in their own thoughts.
Or they might just wait to be told what to do sometimes, instead of
Mhm.
you give them a blank page, and they don't know what to do with it.
They have no idea. And we see this. We definitely see this with a handful of students. They come in, they're very high knowledge, low in the what we call the genius. Doesn't mean they're not a genius. That's just our word for these leadership skills. And then you have the other side. We have students that come to us who have always been told they're a poor student, who have even been removed from other programs.
They're not high. They're not the most literate.
They're low in the knowledge skills, and they're just a slower mover in terms of academic habits and academic skills, but their genius is off the charts.
Yeah, their ability to be like curious about anything,
To start something, to finish something, to
starting and
lead
finishing.
something, to
Yep.
articulate something, to investigate something. They're incredible. And so
And that investigating is so huge. That's Confucius says is the first thing of working what he calls the great education, which is
Mhm.
what he simply calls investigating things.
Mhm.
It's like that's so big.
Yeah,
And
that's like building that curiosity framework of thinking.
yes,
Yeah,
that's
yeah, yeah.
exactly what it
Mhm.
is. And they're the kind of people, these high genius people who are like, you have some big project that you got to tackle. And you
Mhm.
ask them, and they're like, "Yeah, I'd love to help with that, and I have ideas." And you're like, "Great!"
Yeah.
But some of these kids, not all, some of them might be lower in the knowledge. But that's not always the case. You have kids who are high in both.
You do.
But you also have this funny thing where some of these kids have been considered poor students,
Mhm.
but it's only poor students because all you're gauging them with is these sort of knowledge criteria.
They should be at their grade level.
Yeah, how many words per minute do they read, or
Mhm.
how well do they know their multiplication tables? They should do those things well, but maybe they're not cognitively ready for those things yet. And that's all you're basing your assessment on them with.
Mhm,
And so
mhm.
it's like, no, there's a whole nother thing underneath. And you have some kids that are low in both. That could be the case too.
For sure. And we also have the other case where we have kids that are high in knowledge and genius, and
Yes,
they've come from a public
that's right.
school. They've always been a wonderful student. They've always been a teacher favorite. And we see very quickly in our close community that they haven't learned
The
to
heart.
value being a nice person.
Yeah, and so like heart is the ability to pay attention to the welfare of the community, and that's how we define heart. And you can see that these kids have been the golden student everywhere they've been, but based on their knowledge, the sort of union of their knowledge and their genius, but their heart, um, it's definitely this thing that lurks underneath. And when left alone, you see other things come out. And in our small community, you will see those
We
things
see
come out,
everything.
guaranteed.
Mhm,
Mhm.
mhm.
So that's been really helpful to our families as well, just to see where are these hidden gaps, where are these hidden gifts on both
That's right.
sides,
That's right.
and we have wonderful, wonderful, deep conversations with our families, and our 3 times a year we have like a parent teacher conference. We have these meetings, and we
But the
talk
parents are
about.
in through the rest of the year too, with
Yeah,
the
they
rest of
are.
the
Yep.
presentations and
We have a lot of activities
lot
and
of
things going
activity.
on,
Yeah.
but specifically the character map we do 3 times a year, and we have these great conversations with these parents. We have a very close working relationship with these parents. We definitely view ourselves as providing a service to families. Having a large family ourselves, we really value family first mentality. Parents are the first authority over their child, and we're here to supplement their efforts in raising and educating their children. And so these character maps are really a great way to just be another perspective for to give the parents.
Mhm.
On their child, and then some of the parents choose to share this with their children, and it's really incredible. We have one student who, he's not doing his best work, not doing his best work, not doing his best work, and we, after character mapping as a team, we just saw, it's just his finishing power. He
Hmm.
just can't finish something, and so we had this discussion.
Because sometimes finishing isn't the purpose, but there are times when finishing is of vital importance, and he would have trouble doing
Finishing,
this.
I mean, it was
But the
incredible
character map showed
how
that to
hard it was
us.
for him to finish. So the character map revealed this, across settings with the teachers, and then we had the meeting with his parents, and we discussed this finishing power. And then he comes back to school the next week or whenever it was when we
Yeah.
resumed, and I'm in class with him, and Miss Fitzgerald, I'm done. And I couldn't believe it.
And he
You
said,
are?
yeah,
And I looked at it and I was like, you are done. And this looks wonderful. And I was like, what happened? This is amazing, And he said, well, my finishing power is really low. And I really want to work on this. And, I've really got to start finishing my work. And it was
Aw,
wonderful. It was
yeah.
wonderful. He took that growth on for himself and
and that's
started
a
to
genius
value that.
trait. That's a
It's
genius trait.
genius.
Not his. It wasn't his knowledge that was a problem. It
Right.
was this other sort of the habit that he hadn't yet built. And I don't think that's really stopped since then. He took it to
Yeah.
heart, and his parents took it to heart, and it was a transformation. And that it's that growth, and that's all we care about on the character maps is
Growth.
growth from one tour to the next, and that's all we care about on there. Not where you are or where you're going to end up later. It's just where are you now compared to before, and that's growth.
I love that. It seems that you're putting some very tangible processes, words, ideas to help teachers sort of assess virtue and habits. I think that's really
Yes.
great. You're making it really practical for them to be able to talk about habits and virtues,
Mm.
and I,
Yeah.
I think that's really great. Categorizing them in that way seems to be very a very practical way to help a school. I love this idea. I feel like more schools need to be doing this because when it comes to, schools and their mission statements saying, "Oh, we're going to help your children develop moral and intellectual virtues," that's just kind of jargon.
It's
But
jargon
but
most
you
of the time.
guys are actually taking that what we call jargon and really making it tangible and work
Yeah.
and not just be this is what we do, but this is like really what we do.
Well, part of what's happened in education is an educator has become a vocation. And it was
Right.
never a vocation in the past. And we also remind our teachers of this all the time because teaching is demanding. You throw open your heart to the students, and sometimes it comes back a little bit sliced up, a little bit more than you'd want it to be. And that's how it's always been for teachers because it's very intimate. But now sometimes people enter the field because it's a job. They say, "Well, what do you want to be?" Just like I was asked, "What do you want to be when you're older?" And I'm like, "Oh, I guess a teacher, you know." And so I think there was something deeper for me. But for some people, um, they enter in because they know that they had a good teacher, and hey, they can make some money while doing it and get summers off and all this stuff. And so it's become just their 9 to 5.
Mm-hmm.
And but teaching historically has a far deeper spiritual component, and it's something that you give your soul to. It actually requires your soul to become a teacher. And but what happens is as it's become more institutionalized and systematic, there's still this urge by people who care tremendously to say, look, we want you to become a virtuous leader of society. And so they put that on there as you enter into the doors of the building. It's right there. You know, we're shaping our students. The students of tomorrow are here today, and these sorts of things, you
Yeah.
know. And they really believe that. But because the system is so big and it's viewed as a vocation, not as something you give your soul to, that it does become more jargon. And so we're lucky. We're very small. We're very communal. So we can move around the pieces as we need to. We can shift just whenever we need to make things work better. So we have that privilege. And if you're a school of gosh, even 500 or 1,000 kids, how could you possibly map all of their character maps? You can't. It's too big. All you have to just, it's crowd control and it's efficiency. And we talk often about you have these kind of these two main parameters, and one is the management systems and the other one is the culture.
Mm-hmm.
And for us, our management systems are dictated by the culture.
Hmm.
Our culture is what guides everything. And so we make sure that our management systems and approaches match our culture. But if you grow too big too fast, the management systems have to dictate the culture. And so then everything you do, you have to look to, well, what is the protocol? What does what does our rules and regulations say? And that's how we're gonna do this. And then that shift, that sort of molds the culture. But we're very lucky, and other small schools are lucky as well, is they can lead with the culture. But what's happened is over time, as we become more managerial and systematic, is even if you're starting a small school, you don't look to culture first, you look to the system.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're really lucky in that we've, I guess, understood that to some degree, as much as our little understanding can be. And we really make sure that we don't do something unless it fits our culture. We just won't do it. We're so stubborn and we just refuse. If it doesn't fit our culture, we will not do it.
Mm-hmm.
And right now we can afford to do that. Later on, as more growth happens, we have quite a big waiting list right now. Then you have to make the changes as they come.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, this has been an amazing conversation. I'm sure very thought provoking and interesting and inspiring for my listeners. I wanted to end our show, like I always do, asking you both to share either a quote from a book that has had an impact on you personally, or a book that you wish you had read sooner in your life.
When I first was considering this question, my thought to a book that I wished I had had sooner in my life, I just immediately thought, I feel like they've all come at the right time. I feel like those books have come when I needed it. Maybe even books where this has been the case. Books have been mentioned to me and I didn't really pick it up, and then later I did, and I was actually ready for it and ready to apply it at that point. So I feel like my book timing has been pretty arranged nicely. Yes.
So you don't have one to give or a quote or anything.
A book I wish I had earlier in life,
Yeah.
or a quote from a book.
Yeah. You got anything?
Well, I don't know.
All
There's
right.
too many. There's
There's a
too
lot.
many.
There's a lot. I think one that was a real big impact on me was well, there's an ancient Chinese text called Zhuan Falun, and that was a huge impact on my understanding of how to be how to just interact with people in a normal way and build myself from the inside out. But in terms of education, I think John Taylor Gatto's essay called "The 7 Lessons School Teacher" was huge. That was a very, very big impact on me. I think I read it once a year at least. So his 7 Lessons School Teacher was awesome. And then there's a quote by Confucius. He says, "The superior man is virtuous, wise, and bold." And I think that's so fascinating. It's so easy to think about, oh, the virtuous and wise. Yeah, sure, we all want that. But he adds that third one in there of the bold. And it's like very brave and courageous. And it's not looking back.
Mm.
It's marching forward steadily and with your head high. There's a lot of dignity to that. And so I think those three come together in a very marvelous way. And I think in classical education, it's very easy for us to be virtuous and wise. Obviously, most classical schools, we're a strong Christian base, and the Bible guides everything, and so it's going to be virtuous and wise. That's for sure. There's no way around that. But what about the bold? And I think it's that third one that Confucius is pointing out, that we could all do a little bit better, being a little bit more bold. And I think so. That was a big one. Superior person is virtuous, wise, and bold.
That's good. That's good. All right. Well, thank you so much, both of you, for joining me today. I am very, very delighted to have met both of you. I would love to come visit your school someday. It's just sounds so beautiful, and I'm really excited to introduce this concept to our listeners. So, thank you so much for coming on today.
It's
All right.
great. Thank
Thanks,
you for
Adrian.
having us.
Thank you for listening. You can get involved in a few ways. There's a Facebook page where we actively discuss the ideas around classical education. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/groups/classical education. And if you want to help offset our production costs, you can support the podcast financially by going to www.classicaleducationpodcast.com/support. As the great artist and educator John Ruskin once said, "Well, my friends, the final result of the education I want you to give your children will be in a few words this: they will know what it is to see the sky, they will know what it is to breathe it, and they will know best of all what it is to behave under it as in the presence of a Father who is in heaven."